It's the Beaver Banter podcast. We're back. I'm CJ Baumgartner, Ian Rivers, my co-host here. And Ian, another busy weekend in Beaver sports. Where do you want to go first?
Let's jump right into the big ticket event, the home and home series that men's ice hockey had with UMD. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's a little bit disappointing. These teams, like we talked about it all the way back to November before that North Dakota series. I said this is a big opportunity for this team to beat up on weakened teams. You know, Duluth is not what Duluth normally is. North Dakota is not what they normally are. And both weekends went similar directions. A tie on Friday night, and then on the road on Saturday, they dropped the game. So, pretty disappointing weekend in all things considered. But I think what we learned from this weekend, the main thing we took away is that just how important having Ross Armour is on this team. You know, even though it's not there necessarily from a statistical standpoint, Ross Armour is one of the main key guys that really holds this team together. He's the glue. He's the fifth-year senior. He's the guy that's been around because even though we have a couple of other seniors, you know, two of them are transfers. So there's not that much offensive, you know, firepower coming from the senior class. The defense obviously has Molik and Loft and Elias Rosen, but you know, there's not much experience on those offensive lines. And I think you saw that this weekend with only 3 goals. We've just never really fared that well out of conference. You know, that's just never been something that Bemidji has done well. And I think it does speak to the fact that the CCHA is not quite on the same level as other conferences in the country, at least at this point. But you know, it was disappointing. And you know, we talk about all the time, CJ, that the goals given up in the last 2 minutes of the game. And guess what happens on Friday night with a minute 55 left in the game? It's like clockwork. Duluth scores to tie the game at 1, and what could have been a nice split, you know, even though Saturday night did not go the way you wanted at all, losing 5-2. It turned from what would have been a nice split into, a tie and a loss. You know, not a good way to end your regular season. Out of conference opponents, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weekend where we talked about it. We said there was a chance that they could sweep even, and for them to come away with a tie and a loss is just not, it's not great. And like you said, just the late game goals have really been something that have bit this team. And there's the phrase, you know, plucking defeat from the jaws of victory, and that's almost what they've been doing. I mean, there have been multiple times throughout the year where there are wins to be had, and like you said, they just give up those goals in the final couple minutes. Is that lack of experience? Is that just guys just don't have it? Is it random? Like, what do you attribute this to?
Well, I think because of the fact that it's happening so often, I attribute it to a little bit of everything, right? I think the main thing is probably lack of experience. The defense, they've done so well for majority of the year, but it just seems like, you know, they get to that last, they play 58 minutes of solid hockey, and then it just, for whatever reason, falls apart. Like we won the face-off, which is rare because without Armor, especially, face-offs were really hard to come by this weekend. So we win the face-off and we kind of half chuck it down the ice. It's not moving that fast. You never really thought it was going to be a goal, but it was headed right towards the net, and probably without 5 feet to spare, Duluth sweeps it away. And then, you know, they come right back down the ice and score immediately. And it's so frustrating when that happens time and time again. This is, I think, the 5th time this year, not including the game against Minnesota, which doesn't count. Obviously, it's an exhibition. So if you count that game, it's 6 times this season, and they've played, you know, like 20 games. 6 times in 20 games. That's not a good track record of giving up goals at the very last dying moments. And then, you know, this weekend, it's got a big implication on the pairwise, you know, and pairwise is something that we had kind of already written off. And then you go into Minnesota State Mankato and you have a really good weekend on the road, and you're up to 19th. And now after this, we only dropped 3 spots, which I think is a bit shocking considering Duluth was around 35th in pairwise. But getting a tie at home and then losing, I guess, on the road is probably the best place to lose. So we only dropped to 22. But you still have to think that that's probably out of the question still, getting an at-large bid. They would have to be really, really solid, and they have not shown the ability to do that over long periods of time. You know, they got a tough series coming up against Bowling Green that we'll preview here in a second. This weekend, it's on the road, and that's going to be a really big series, I think, for this team. And I'll touch on that later. I don't want to get too much into that now, but then, you know, some of these teams that we've been losing to, you know, every loss to Lake Superior State or St. Thomas, those can really just bog you down, and then you got to be perfect. So I think the realistic chance for this team to make the tournament is still going to go through the conference tournament. But man, I think even with the inconsistencies that we've seen, I don't know if I trust this team in a tournament format. But the good news is, you know, if we can get a high enough seed, which right now we sit in third in the CCHA standings. Of course, we've played four less games than both Mankato and Bowling Green, who both swept this weekend. So we did fall behind there a little bit, but we'll get an opportunity to gain ground. So if we can win the regular season or even get the 2 seed and have a favorable matchup, I think we can win a 3-game series in the quarterfinals, and then the semifinals and the championship are both just one game. So that it kind of bodes well for an inconsistent team because all you got to do is show up one night. You don't have to win 2 games. So that's something that I guess we can hope goes better. And you know what? It's only January. It's early January. We still got a full slate. We have, I think, 7 series left. So 14 games. Bowling Green, Northern Michigan. We play each team in the conference one more time to end the season. So we're going to have our money's. We're going to get our money's worth of games, and we still have plenty of time. These guys, hopefully offensively, especially the younger guys, can start to get a rhythm, and they start to, you know, they say it about every sport. The end of the season, those freshmen are no longer freshmen. So hopefully that bodes well and bodes truthfully for the Beavers as well, because they could really use somebody, especially without Armor out. Because I think he's probably going to miss the Bowling Green series as well, which is not ideal, but they need somebody to step up offensively.
Well, and you mentioned the inexperience, and it's not necessarily, I mean, there's some young players on this team, but like you said, there's also a few transfers in who are playing. How much does that inexperience kind of factor into that? Because yeah, like they're veterans and they've been around college hockey, but they still don't know their teammates as well, or should not matter because we're halfway through January now.
Well, at this point, no, it shouldn't matter. And I think because you've seen guys like Grant Crookshank, he transferred into the university or at St. Cloud State University, and he's been an impact starter since like day one. And you see it everywhere else. I think they're, you know, and that can't be really expected with everybody that transfers into a new system, especially when, you know, Crookshank's got a pretty good roster around him there at St. Cloud State. So it's a little bit easier to find your footing right away. When you come in here and you've got tons of freshmen and sophomore forwards that you're playing on lines with that aren't even used to playing with each other, you know, it can kind of get a little bit tricky. And I still don't know if Saratori's found his perfect line setup. And now, you know, it gets even harder losing one of your top forwards on your first line. So that I think does play into it. The inexperience, I think more so the inexperience from the younger players than it does with like guys like you know, Pickering and Martin. I'm blanking right now, but Martin, them coming in, you know, it gets harder to find your footing. Like I said, because of the younger guys, when you've got a bit more of a balanced system, it's easier to find your footing right away. So I think that does have a big part in it.
So let's look forward, if you want, and let's go towards the Bowling Green series. Like you said, they're coming off a sweep and are ahead of the Beavers in the CCHA standings. And even though the Beavers still have some games to catch up with in the conference, this still is a big series because you got to go to Bowling Green and you got to take care of business and do all that kind of stuff. What's your outlook for this pretty big series as we're still in January?
Well, I think like we talked about, this is such a massive series because you want to bounce back off of a tough weekend and really say that's what they did with Mankato. You know, they bounced back off of a pretty ugly split with Lake Superior State, and they ended up sweeping Mankato, taking 5 out of 6 points on the weekend. I don't necessarily think you have to take 5 out of 6 points from this, but I would like at least a split. Don't lose any ground on Bowling Green this weekend, at the very least. And I'm not sure exactly who Mankato plays, but we got to stay up there. We got to continue to fight for that top spot in the CCHA. And this is going to be one of the biggest weekends we have remaining. You know, this is a top two team in the conference, and we're getting them in mid-January. We won't get another opportunity, so you've got to take points away from them when you can. I think on the road, especially, it's going to be so key. Even just getting 3 points here, taking pretty much anything you can away from this series, and just staying within striking distance of the Falcons is going to be so big. And I think they can. Bowling Green this year, they're 12 and 12 overall. Like they've played some really good games where you're like, wow, that's a really good team. You know, they're going to actually have some offensive firepower. But then they've had some games where you also are like, oh gosh, I mean, what are they doing? You know, they're just not playing like the Bowling Green that we kind of know, from years past. And I think that's the thing about them. They're probably just as inconsistent if you look at their schedule as Bemidji State is, this year. Um, they feel like they've been as consistent as they want to be. Because you look at 12 and 12 record, they've got a lot of talent offensively, especially. And I think that, Matthias Scholl's probably going to have to be on his game. That's one thing we didn't touch on. Gavin Enright went in, gave up, you know, I I'm not sure how many of those goals he gave up, but he gave up at least three of them against Duluth. So I think Enright's time to prove himself as a kind of a split goalie with Scholl is past us, but Scholl's going to have to be really on his game because they've got some talented forwards. It's going to be difficult, man. Without Armor, I just don't even know what to expect from this team because we've really only seen them the 2 games now, and they haven't looked good offensively in those games. But there has been some bright spots. Carter Jones, I think Lucas from Beaver Territory tweeted this out. He's actually looked pretty good in the limited ice time that he's gotten this year. So maybe if he can get some more role time on this team, he can really pop. He scored a goal, I believe, against Duluth this weekend, and had an assist as well, I believe, on Saturday. So he's been a bright spot, in the darkness. But man, it's going to be difficult. I don't know. I'm hoping they can take at least 3 points away. That would be so big from this series.
Well, and especially because you talk about just not losing ground, because no matter what, Mankato's going to stay where they're at. They have a series against Arizona State this weekend, and both games are down in Tempe. So that's where they're going. No CCHA games for the Mavs this weekend. So it is imperative, like you said, that they make sure that they just kind of stay where they're at because they still have some games to give and sometimes to catch up on those points. So at least kind of treading water, maybe the right way to put it, and then taking advantage in those other spots. But I guess, Ian, as we look towards it, it's a road series. Just I mean, I don't know. Do we trust the Beavers? Because I think we talk about those gimme games and it's always given them trouble. This isn't a gimme game. This is a team, like you said, they've been a little inconsistent, but still are towards the top of the conference this year. Do we trust the Beavers to get it done? And then that's, I suppose, my last thing I got to say on hockey.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I do because I trust Saratori. Saratori is one of the best coaches in the country at getting everything he can out of players that are not necessarily as talented as other teams in the conference and the country. You look at where the Beavers are, and I think it's a testament to Saratori this year, getting what he can out of these guys. We were predicted fourth. That could still happen. We could have a rough end of the season, and we could end up finishing fourth or even worse. But I think that he's going to get this team ready to go. Bowling Green coming off a big sweep this last weekend. I think we can split this series. I would be shocked to see a sweep, but a split would be ideal. Like you said, Minnesota State, they won't be making up any ground or gaining any ground this weekend. Ferris State and Lake Superior State, a battle for kind of the lower end of the conference there. And then St. Thomas going into Houghton, hopefully can take some points away from the Huskies as we try to stave them off from nipping at our heels a little bit right now. So big series, big weekend for the Beavers, and hopefully hopefully they can show some of that resiliency that they've done in the past and pull through and get some points from the Falcons this weekend.
Yeah, that'll be the big test for the Beavs. And as we look in women's hockey now, they haven't played in a month, Ian. That's been kind of the storyline here with them. And maybe the month off is what they needed, considering they only have 4 wins coming into this game. But it's a pretty tough test. They got to go to Amsoil and take on UMD. The Bulldogs are ranked number 6 in the country. That one's going to be tough for them to really get any momentum. So it's pretty much just don't embarrass yourselves and get out of Dodge. I think try and play some respectable games against a very, very good team. See where you stand up, and it doesn't get much easier as you got to host Minnesota the week after, but still going to be a tough one for the Lady Beavs this weekend.
Yeah, I think like we said with women's basketball, men's basketball, hopefully this is kind of a turning the calendar, a lot of people say there's nothing different about the new year. It's just a different day on the calendar. Hopefully that's not true for this Beavers team. If we can go in and get some points out of this weekend, I think that's something to hold your head high on as we try to make up ground. I think right now we're sitting 4 points behind St. Thomas in the battle for 7th place. So if we really want to have any chance at making up any ground in the conference this year, it's got to start with getting some upsets. It's not going to be easy. You've got, like you said, Duluth, Minnesota, and then Duluth yet again on the schedule, but it does ease up. We've got the games against Wisconsin out of the way. We've only had to play Ohio State. We had to play them 4 times this year. We've already got those out of the way. So, it eases up a little bit here coming up after the Minnesota series, St. Cloud State, St. Thomas, Minnesota State. That's 3 back-to-back weekends. You can make up some ground, but I do truly think it's got to start here because it's getting dangerously close to, even if you start winning some games, you're not going to be making up much ground if you fall too much further behind. But I think they can show some resiliency, like we talked about just with the men's hockey team. It would be great to see some rejuvenated offense out of this team this weekend in Duluth.
So now as we look towards women's basketball here, the Beavers got swept over the weekend, and their record here as we look at the Lady Beavs, it's 1-9 in the conference. They're 4-10 overall on the season. 1-9 puts them at the bottom of the NSIC North and tied for the worst record in the conference outside of USF. And I really thought that game against Upper Iowa was really going to be a winnable game for the Lady Beavs, and they fell 82-69. And maybe you chalk this up to bad defense, giving up 82 points. Maybe you chalk it up to the fact that the Peacocks, who are 6-8, 2-7 in the NSIC, they were the first team to shoot 50% or higher against Bemidji State in almost 2 years. So maybe you just say wow, they just shot unbelievably well. Maybe you chalk it up to that. But I mean, in the stat, Bemidji State was shot 67%, 12 for 18 in the field in the first quarter, and only made 15 baskets in the following 3 quarters, dipping all the way down to about 39%. So that's just one where you had a really good opportunity to win. I know it's in Fayette. I know you had to go on the road, but that's a winnable game that the Lady Beavs just kind of let them get away. And then more of the same followed against the Warriors as well, losing 76-63.
Yeah, a little bit of a disappointing start to the new year, or I should say, start to the new semester now as you jump into the spring semester of school at Bemidji there. I was hoping we could get one of these 2 games just to kind of cleanse their palate. Now, like you said, they're 1-9 in conference, 4-10 overall. And it doesn't get much easier this week. You got to play Concordia St. Paul, who, is 7-7 on the year, 4-6 in conference. So that's going to be the easier game of the 2. And then you got to play Mankato, who is 12-2, 8-2 in the conference, ranked number 11 in the country. So it's really not going to get much easier. But, I like what I see from the offensive perspective, at least. They're putting up at least 60, 69, 63 point games. They're not putting out any of those 48. We had a stretch there where we weren't putting up more than 50, 42, 49, 42, and 48 in 5-game stretch. So it's better. The offense, they've averaged around 67 points, I think, over the last 3 games. So that is something that they've been improving on, and hopefully that can continue. They're going to need it to pull out some home wins this weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at that offensive output from the Beavers, um, trying to find the right stat here, but if you look at the offensive numbers for Bemidji State, they were led in scoring again by Sam Potoganchik, and going back-to-back games with 18 points. So I think there's some offense there to be had with some of these Beavers, but I mean, it's just tough when it feels like we talked about it last week. Those were two games that there's no real gimme game on the schedule considering where Bemidji State is at in the standings, but this was a good opportunity for them to pick up wins. They didn't quite get there, but like you said, that offense is kind of turning a corner at the very least and showing some kind of life. And look, this season's going to be whatever it's going to be, but if you can kind of build on that and show like, okay, like our offense is kind of gelling and we kind of have an identity going into next year, that is something you can do. And that is something you can build on and a positive you can look on this team for throughout the season and going into next year if this holds up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more what this season's about at this point. Looking at 1-9 in the conference, you kind of have to start just taking the season for what it is and hoping to build off of something here coming down the stretch. Because, man, they're not like with women's hockey. It's going to be tough to make up any ground, especially when you look at some of the opponents coming up. There's still a lot of basketball to be played, though, so we're not going to write this season off just yet. We're not going to shut the door. We're just going to keep plugging away, take it one game at a time, one weekend at a time. That's really all you can do when you're struggling this bad, is just look at the weekend in front of you and go from there.
Yeah, and back onto the women's basketball train here. You talk about their opponents next week for the Beavers in Concordia, St. Paul, and Minnesota State Mankato. If you look at both those teams, Mankato right now, they are sitting, and I'm trying to find the right stat here. Mankato is sitting in the conference with a 8-2 record in the NSIC. But if you look at Concordia St. Paul, they have a 4-6 clip. So, I mean, there's a possibility for a split if you play well in Concordia and you do all the right stuff. So there is a possibility you can steal a win there. That game against Mankato is going to be tough. It's one of those like, hey, can you put together a good effort? Can you do some things against a good team? Whatever. But yeah, it's getting to about that time in the season.
Yeah, definitely a more winnable game against Concordia St. Paul. Both those games are at home, though. So hopefully if they get some crowd out there, they can at least make some noise. And, like you said, more Minnesota State's going to be one of those moral victory games where you take away and say, yeah, we did this really well against a really good opponent. We need to build off of that.
Yeah, and I think especially, and you looked at it in the Winona State game for the Beavers, their first quarter was good, and then they trailed off. They led after one quarter, and then just the final three. And you saw it in the first half, in the first game, I should say, against Upper Iowa, a nice first quarter, and then the rest kind of falling off. So Bemidji State doing a nice job. Maybe the game plan coming into games is being played really well, and then as the game goes on, either the other team's able to counter or just the style of play. Maybe you can't keep it up all game. Maybe it just comes down to shooting, but with the way that this team is going, just feels like it's one of those where they kind of have to figure out a way. And we mentioned this a little bit with the men's hockey team of you got to find a way to finish games. And for the women's basketball team, it's like, you guys start really well. You just have to be able to find that flow and be able to kind of hang on. If you're going to get that lead early, you got to find a way to do it in that aspect.
Absolutely. Yeah. They seem to fall off around the middle of the game, and towards the end of the game, they just tail off, and it's almost like they tire themselves out. I'm not sure if that's a good way to put it, but the box score seems to think that way, at least.
So now let's take a look at men's basketball, Ian, and let's kind of see how the weekend went. We said, hey, can you get a sweep men's basketball or a split rather? Is that something you can do? And they were able to do it over the last couple days. Over the last couple games, I should say. They were able to do that. They had an 87-80 loss in Fayette, Iowa, and then they came out and they got a nice little win against Winona State. A little bit of a back and forth affair, trying to do that. And I think that's important. Not only did they get a win, against Winona State and just kind of keep that conference record kind of at bay where it's at 5-5. But they're able to get one where it's a back and forth contest. And we talk about this with the men's hockey team and learning how to finish games and learning how to win and doing it that way. And that's a notch in the belt for the men's basketball team, being able to try and being able to get that win against Winona, getting them their 10th win of the season. And I believe, if I have the stat right, I think that's the Beavers' first 10-win season in a couple years, or at least the fastest they've got to 10 wins in a couple years.
Oh, overall, really? I didn't know that. I could fact check that in a second, but yeah, you're right. This team is kind of clicking. I watched the second half of that Upper Iowa game, and man, it was a little bit disappointing to not win that. They led for most of the second half, and then Upper Iowa just hit the boards pretty hard, and eventually we were not able to keep up with them. Hit a couple 3-pointers late. But they shot the ball really well in this game. Bemidji State, 10 3-pointers, shooting at 37%. That's a pretty good clip from beyond the arc, but only 47% from the field. That's not terrible, but you want that to be better, especially when Upper Iowa shot 55% from the field. That's going to be the difficult part. And we were out rebounded in this game. You talk about it so often. The team that wins the game is a lot of times, especially in college ball, going to win the rebounding battle. And they did that. It was pretty close, but so was the game. Bemidji State had 31 rebounds. Upper Iowa had 35. Mohamed Kone had a pretty good game, 19 points, 10 rebounds. That's a double-double for him. And then on Saturday night, John Sutherland had his own double-double, 18 points and 12 boards. So a couple of double-doubles this weekend. And the rebounding battle, since we're talking about it, was won by Bemidji State. It was a pretty close game, and it was a pretty close rebounding battle. They only won by one. It was 33 to 32 in that case. But yeah, I think a good split. It keeps them alive for that number 4 spot, because I believe if you're looking at the men's basketball tournament, I think it's just the top 4 teams from each division, right, that make it to the, what is it called out there, the Pentagon out in Sioux Falls. So that would be pretty exciting. Right now we're holding off all those teams at the bottom. It kind of seems like Crookston might be the one that's not really competitive for that spot. But man, we've talked about that St. Cloud State game so many times, but that team's sitting at 3-7 right now. One of those wins being over Bemidji State. That one is one that we are going to look back on and be like, oh man, if we could have just closed that game out and won that game, that would have been huge. But overall, I mean, we're 5-1 in our last 6, so I'm really happy with that. And then you look at the games coming up this weekend. This is same teams, Concordia St. Paul and Minnesota State, and Concordia St. Paul should be a win. If they lose that game, that's going to be pretty frustrating. 3-13 team, 1-9 in the conference. Mankato's 12-4, but they're only 6-4 in the conference. So take the 12-4 with what you will. Mankato, at home, it's, I think, a winnable game, and it could be a statement game for these Beavers to show us, hey, we're here. We're here. We mean business this year. A couple of games against the South Division. I'm excited, man. I think I'm going to be trying to watch these games. Mankato, probably not. I might be a little bit busy. Actually, that game will be over by the time my Chargers play in the playoffs. So, yeah, I'll give that a look. Definitely bring my laptop and turn that on. So it's going to be big. I mean, this basketball team's given us reason to be excited about another winter sports team. And, in the past, CJ, we haven't necessarily had that second team to kind of piggyback off of. So we've kind of just had to hope the men's hockey carries the weight. But basketball is picking up the slack this year.
Yeah, especially when we had the old R&B show, we had to rely too much on Football Hour when those things were not going the way that we wanted. And now we have, like you said, a second team to follow, and it's the men's basketball team. In terms of hey, if there's a bandwagon, if there's a winter sport, if you're a Beaver alum, and there's what sport do I want to put my energy into? Right now, it's men's hockey, and men's basketball is just the direction that it's going. In the fall, it was football, and women's soccer. Like those are the ones, if you're going to spend any attention towards Beaver athletics, it's going to be towards those schools. And the rebounding you mentioned has been just so key for this team. And for them to be able to do that is for them to be able to win is when they're able to rebound well. I think I saw a stat with Sutherland out of, I think 11 of his rebounds came on the defensive end, which is just huge. So, just I mean a big thing for Bemidji State. They got to 10 wins. That's the most. I did double check this stat. That's the most wins they've had in a season since the 1920 season when they got to 14 wins before everything went sideways. But I mean, this is a team that if they can rebound well, and we saw with the women's basketball team, that loss that they had against Winona, they got out rebounded, I think 34-24 or something like that. So rebounding wins games, stealing possessions from another team, or at least giving yourself a second chance and being able to do that, hugely important, and letting your playmakers kind of play. And Coney's had some good games as well here in the recent stretch. So this is, like you said, a team that's won 5 out of their last 6. They're trending upward, and just something to get on the bandwagon. Are you predicting a sweep? Are you going to go out there and do that, Ian, or are you going to confidently predict a split?
I'm pretty comfortable saying that they will probably split. But I do think, I haven't looked at Mankato's schedule. I don't know who they've played or who they've beaten or who they've lost to, but I think they could win. They could sweep this weekend. And if they did, that means to me, man, this team is actually for real. They would be 7-1 in their last 8 games. And that would really give me all the confidence I need to kind of lean into the rest of this season pretty comfortably. You look at it, you probably got about 10, 12 games left, 12 or 14 maybe games left of the season before the hopeful appearance of the Beavers in the postseason. And I think that's what we have to set our sights on. If you look at the standings right now, Bemidji State like 3 games back from 3rd place. So that seems like it might be out of reach. There might be a cream of the crop at the top of the North, but the rest of the North is wide open. That 4th spot is going to be up for grabs. So hopefully the Beavers can stay consistent. You got to go at least 1-1 this weekend against a quality Minnesota State team. And then hopefully you get yours against Concordia St. Paul. But man, I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility that they could get a sweep, because it is realistic possibility they could do that.
And with only 12 games to go in the regular season, you have 6 more weekends of basketball. Every single win that you pick up is going to be huge at this point. Now, there are some games to be had, like you're going to play St. Cloud State again. You're going to have Minot, UMary. You're going to have a chance to pick up some wins here throughout this schedule. But I mean, you can't take any one of these for granted. We talked about in women's soccer when their season was going on, obviously a little bit more extreme because we're talking about them getting an NCAA tournament berth and not just a berth into the conference tournament. But we said that they had to go perfect, they had to run the table. Even so for football, had to run the table going to the end of the season if you want to get to the NCAA tournament. But this team, if you want to make the NSIC tournament, you're not going to have to go undefeated, but you are going to have to continue this pace that you're at. You're going to have to, on your worst, you're going to have to split, and you're going to have to pick up some sweeps somewhere along the line here in the schedule. So, Bemidji State sitting in a nice spot. They're going to have to keep this momentum rolling, and at least for this weekend, they have a good chance to just kind of keep it going.
Yeah, I'm looking back here. I think this team has a real possibility of getting 15, 16, maybe even 17, depending on how comfortable you are and how well this team can actually play down the stretch. But I would say 15, 16 wins. And since I've stepped foot on campus in 2015, this team has not eclipsed that 14-win season like you talked about. So that would be a really big landmark for this team, getting to that 15-win mark. And I think, you get that 16, 17-win mark, I think it would be hard to see Bemidji State getting past in the NSIC North. You'd probably get a postseason berth, and you'd probably get to go to Sioux Falls and play in the Pentagon. So it's an exciting time to be a men's basketball fan of Bemidji for sure. Really good opportunity here. Really good opportunity. And like you said, you can't get too far ahead of yourself. You got to take it one step at a time. So hopefully we're not jinxing them by saying all this stuff about postseason berth, and then they're going to end up going 3-9 in the last 12 or something. But this team looks different. They look solid. So I'm gonna predict at least a split, and I think there's probably a 70 75% chance that they um, sweep this weekend. So not bad, not bad. I'm really excited about this.
Ian, anything else with the Beavs we need to touch on? I think we hit up all the sports. Is there any other bits you wanted to get to as we kind of wind down the pod for the week?
Man, I don't think so. I think we've covered pretty much everything that's been going on. Women's hockey will start picking up again, and there'll be more in the news cycle. But I guess I'll do a personal flex. I just recently purchased tickets to the Minnesota Vikings playoff game for this weekend, so that's where I'll be on Sunday afternoon. It'll be way up high, way up high. So don't anybody think I'm dropping money on sideline tickets, but it's a fun opportunity going with the dad and grandpa, so that should be fun.
Yeah, I mean, congrats to you. That's going to be a really fun environment. I'm trying to see if there's any Beaver connections to that, and I don't think so. Outside, maybe there's the NSIC connection, obviously with Thielen and Ham, but like Gunner's still with the Steelers, unless there's some kind of coaching thing out there. But hey, if you're talking playoffs, I know you might not want to hear this because of your Chargers fandom, Ian, but I think we should give props to Bemidji State grad Trent Baalke, the GM of the Jacksonville Jaguars, real GM prowess to select Trevor Lawrence #1 overall. But hey, props. He's a Beav. He's one of us. And the Jacksonville Jaguars have won the AFC South, which I don't think I could have told you at the beginning of the year. So props to him. Another Beaver in the pro.
Yeah, absolutely. Congrats to them. And, if they win this week, I'll probably be cheering for them to beat whoever it be, Cincinnati or, well, it wouldn't be Cincinnati, but Kansas City. If they end up going to Kansas City, I'll definitely be cheering for them in that. So good luck to them, I guess, if they win this weekend. But go Chargers, go Vikings, go Beavers.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.